It's okay. We're fine. All right, so chapter 1. Today and Tuesday, I wanted to just go over some of the basic terms and sort of our approach to studying what we're studying. And if you did read the syllabus, you might have thought it's a little extreme to talk about what the commas and the ampersand mean in the title of the class. But I hope by the end of today you'll see why that's in there, and I think by the end of the semester you'll see how it's much more interesting to study this class the way we're doing it, because most other classes are going to ask you to remember things like who really invented the printing press. It wasn't Gutenberg. And, what year did the Telecommunications Act get signed? Which, to me, you can Google all that, right? So we're going to try to talk about stuff you can't Google, necessarily. The first thing I wanted to do, and I alluded to this on the syllabus, this is a gift that I made myself. It's about as good as I can do. And trust me, it took way too much time to make this, but... So y'all know I care about the title of the course, if you read the syllabus. And one thing I think is really important is we know in the English language, we read from left to right, so left is generally the most important, and we go down, up to down, so the top is generally the most important. But in this class, no one term, media isn't the key term, culture isn't the key term, society isn't the key term, so these things revolving around are just indicating that they're all equal. It's just that in English we have to put them in a certain order. And the arrows indicate what we're going to talk about for like the last half of class or so. That said, your textbook is essentially a history book. I don't think the authors know anything about culture, so a lot of the time what I'm going to bring into the class is the culture piece, because they don't talk about culture that much. And the title of the book doesn't even say society, so it doesn't seem like the optimal book, but we'll fix that for you. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is talk about what is media, what is culture, what is society. And on the exam, some of the questions are going to ask you to read a short thing, like in 1991, so-and-so group brought out this rock song. Is that media, is that culture, is that society? So I'm going to ask you to be able to use what we're talking about now to analyze or interpret things on the exam. And for the rest of the semester, one of the things you should always be doing is starting off with these questions. When I read this section, or when I do this thing Steve asked me to do, is this primarily about media and or culture and or society? So we need to know what these terms mean. And actually, surprise, surprise, the book's approach to culture doesn't work for us. So, first of all, a medium carries a message. So if you ever did the thing where you put two cans together on the string, you hold them tight and then you talk to each other, the string is the medium. If you text somebody, the phone lines or whatever are the medium. Television, it used to be the airwaves were the medium. So they recorded the show, they broadcasted it over the airwaves to your antenna. So the medium is kind of the way that the thing gets to the audience. The way that culture gets to the audience is what we're going to say at the end. So you can see some examples of mass media or mass mediums. Radio, television. It's kind of interesting because they work differently, right? Like radio, generally, when do you listen to radio nowadays, if at all? In the car, yeah. And so it's a mass medium. The same thing is being broadcast to lots of cars, right? But you're sitting probably alone in your car listening to it, so it's a little bit different. Television, typically you watch that at home, and if you live with people, you might be sitting with 2 or 3 people at a time. It's still a medium, just who the audience is different. Is anybody going to go to a Super Bowl party, or does anybody go out to watch like MMA fights or pay-per-view concerts or whatever? Okay, so then it's going to be like hundreds of people in a bar watching the same one broadcast that went to the bar That's mass media. And then the other thing we're going to think about when we think of media is the industries. And so we're almost always going to have to talk a little bit about how the industry works to understand why the culture is placed the way it is, or how the culture got to where it is, what the effects on society are. We're using effects loosely now. So we're going to talk mainly about technology and the industry in the media piece. Okay, what is culture? So if you read chapter 1, you know that the book wants culture to equal society. And their position is that culture is broadly how we live together and make sense of our lives. But that doesn't help us because that's describing society. So now, if you are somebody who's interested in culture, you know their definition is right. It's just not one that's going to help us. And we're not going to get too caught up on the culture-society distinction, but I think making it two distinct things as much as we can will make it easier to study. So Rosaldo says culture can be thought of broadly as like our family culture, our ethnicity culture, GSU culture, but it also can be thought of narrowly, and they say to the opera or art of museums. So to start, we're going to look at culture in the narrow sense they've described here. So here's an example, kind of broad versus narrow. And what you're going to see in everything in the left column, which we're not going to call culture after today, is actually society. But that's a little bit ahead of where we're going, so if that confuses you, don't worry about that. If you're at all confused about where we're going, the right side is describing the culture pieces we're going to study, or at least the media in which the culture comes to us. So we're going to study things about books. We're going to study radio. No, we're not going to study radio, actually. We're going to study television shows. We're going to study music. That's culture. When you make a song, that's culture. Society is the other side. Okay, so here are some explanations of the way we're going to look at culture, and this is mostly from the book we used to use for the class, which was much better than this one, unfortunately. First of all, culture is creative expression, and in a perfect world, it provides pleasure and sets standards for what's good or right. But as we get into it, we know that culture is also intended to confront and make uncomfortable. So really what we're talking about when we say culture is art. And the last book that we used in the class explains it includes a society's art, beliefs, customs, games, etc. So I think this is a better way, this number 2 bullet is a better way for us to define culture. We've got society, which is something distinct for analytical purposes. We know they're all like this, right? So there's no culture without society. There's no society without culture. It's a pretty crappy, rudimentary one. But this idea that culture includes something small in society, that's what we're going for. And then this last one, it's both the product. So culture is a song, an album, a movie, a book, a series of books. Culture is a meme. We're actually going to study memes a little bit in the internet chapter. Culture is advertising, the actual commercials. So it's the products, and that's mainly what we're going to study. And I'm not an artist, and I'll just talk a little bit about this. We won't look at, we're going to look at processes today, but that's not good. But the other thing we think of as culture is the processes artists use to create the art. And you'll see some examples of that in a second in the lecture, but unfortunately, we only have so many class periods and we can't study everything I'd like us to study. Okay, so now we know media is the channel, it's technology, it's the business. We know culture we're defining narrowly as art and the way artists make art. And culture, when it wants to get out into the world, needs a way to be communicated. right? So what is the way, if you make a song, you want to get it out to the world? What's the medium? Internet, iTunes, SoundCloud. Do we have any SoundCloud rappers in here? Okay, good. Send me links to your SoundCloud page. I'll check it out. So you can see culture needs a way to be communicated if it wants to hit people. When I was young, you used to get a lot of rap music from guys standing on the corner selling you CDs. When I first moved to Atlanta, I would always ask the guy, can I listen to it first? I'd stand there with his headphones on, and I'd be like, here you go, $5, I'll take that. It usually was pretty poor, but I like to support hip-hoppers, but don't ask me to buy your beat CD. Okay, so now here we see the first connection between media and culture. And a big misconception about art is that a true artist doesn't want to profit from their art. For example, there's this line of thinking about hip-hop culture that true hip-hop artists in the 70s did not want to profit off their culture. That's wrong. As soon as they started throwing parties in like rec centers and stuff, they charged an entry fee to get in. They threw house parties. I don't know if any of you have seen Beat Street, where they connect to the electricity, they bring it into an abandoned building, and they have a party where they charge to get in, they charge you for drinks. So when we're talking about art, we're not making this distinction that true artists are in it for the art. You know, I love music, but if I could make beats like Ninth Wonder, I would be selling them. And he's pretty prolific. If you know Ninth Wonder, he's got beat CDs with beats and beats and beats. And I included a thing in the Chapter 1 folder, No ID, talking about making 444 and a little bit more about just producing in general. And he makes hundreds of beats all the time. So using a channel that's mass mediated can get your culture to the most people possible. We have people in here who are trying to develop YouTube channels where they get paid for their content. We have SoundCloud rappers. There's maybe somebody in here who's on the iTunes music platform. And so that's how culture and media kind of connect up. Okay, and then finally, it's kind of weird to take a class about media, culture, and society. I don't know if the book even has the word society in it. So we need to talk a little bit about what is society. And like I've been saying, this is going to evolve over time. So in class, in the lectures, we're going to take a little bit of a blurry look at what's media, what's culture, and what's society. On the exam, I will try to give you very clear questions to see if you can make these distinctions, kind of the broadest level distinctions. So, society, I don't know where this quote came from. Excuse me, I'm not trying to plagiarize this. I didn't write it. You can Google it and find out. If you find out, let me know. I'll put the citation in there. A society is community, nation, broad groupings of people who have things in common, traditions, institutions, activities, and interests. Now, we can see right away how this defines hip-hop culture. Or this defines, is emo still a thing? Yeah. Okay, so this defines emo culture, right? It's a bunch of people who have a common music, a common fashion sense, a common orientation to the world, but that's not how we're thinking about society. And that's why we need to make this distinction. So when we're talking about fans, we're mainly talking about culture, sometimes talking about society, if that makes sense. I don't want to get too caught up on that. But society, we're going to look at more like institutions and collective activities. So here's a list I got from Wikipedia. Side note, Wikipedia is okay to start your research. You can find terms and ideas and they link to articles, but you generally shouldn't be writing about Wikipedia in your papers. But anyway, for our purposes, what are kind of the big pieces of society? This is the way we're going to look at society. Government organizations. The IRS is society. The TSA is society. I flew to Las Vegas and back Monday and Wednesday, and I got lucky. The TSA lines were fine, but y'all have probably been seeing in the news, especially at our airport, the line going all the way out to the ticketing agencies, and that's a part of society. Infrastructure. Before Kindles and Amazon, where did you buy a book? In a bookstore. How did the books get from the publisher that makes the books to the bookstore? In a truck that drove across the road, right? So infrastructure is part of society, and it's really important. The internet is a part of infrastructure. And I think eventually, right now, we don't think about the internet as like a public utility. I think we eventually will. But that's really confusing. Forget that. Infrastructure is like the way that stuff gets from one place to the other. Family is a part of society, religion, education, the law and the legal system. So when we get to talking about the society piece, a lot of times we're going to be talking about things like laws and education sometimes, and hopefully we don't have to talk about the police too much. Okay, so now we're at the syllabus. And if you haven't read it yet, you should go look at that. It's a little bit, because writing, it gives you more of an opportunity to get a little bit more technical with what you're trying to say. In this forum, I'm not going to make this too complicated, but the syllabus maybe is a step higher and might explain a little bit better if you're kind of a theory person. You know, some people like to think about kind of big ideas. Other people like to think about specific examples. And now what we're going to do is talk about the theory a little and specific examples a lot. So the term we're going to use to describe the interaction, so if I could stop it, media and society, how do they interact, this arrow? The term we're going to use for now is articulation. At the end of the semester, if you have a better metaphor that you think works and makes more sense, I would love to hear about it. But for now, we're going to stick with articulation. And articulation is talked about by a lot of theorists, and the way we're going to look at it is mainly from Stuart Hall's perspective. He was brilliant. He's kind of the father of modern cultural studies in the UK and the US. So articulation is defined in two senses. One, when we talk about articulation, one thing we're talking about is speaking. And so if it's unclear what you're saying, I might ask you, can you articulate a little bit more clearly? Which means articulations happen through communication, which is why articulation makes the first level of sense. Articulations occur in communication contexts. And then two, this is the more important part, articulation also means to link, to connect things. And I'll give you a couple of examples. This is the best, I don't know, maybe you can find a better picture for me. This is a trailer hooked up to a hitch. Has anybody driven a truck before? How hard is it to back up? No, just the truck. Like you're driving your pickup truck or your SUV and you need to back up and go. It's not hard, right? Have you ever driven a truck with a trailer attached to it? How hard is it to back up? It's freaking hard. So the articulation, so what we have here is a vehicle that can go places, and what we have here is a thing that holds stuff, right? A trailer. When you connect them, now you've got a vehicle moving the thing that holds stuff, and it totally changes the two things. When you connect the two things, the vehicle can move much more stuff, right? Because now there's a trailer, and the trailer can go places it couldn't go before because it's now connected to a truck. So articulation is when two things connect, how does one or both of the things change? And that's what Laclau and Mouffe say. And actually, I came to articulation reading Laclau and Mouffe. They say articulations establish a relation among elements, a linkage between media and culture, culture and society, etc., such that the identity of the elements is modified. Okay, that seems kind of complicated, but now let's look at some examples, and I think it'll become more clear. Okay, so the first example is Jay-Z's 444. That's why I asked you to listen to this. I don't know if everybody's heard it. I know it's a little bit old, but it's still the best example I've got. Unfortunately, I don't have all day to prep for you all. I spend way more time than I should already on this, but so 444 is a good example, and we're going to think about how two cultural pieces, two pieces of art, articulate. So what we're going to do is watch this video that shows the samples that are used for each song on 444, and then it plays the actual song. So what I want you to be listening for, if you're not familiar with this, and actually this is linked, I just changed that. What I want you to be listening for is what does the original sample or samples sound like, and then how does it change on the actual album, and then we'll talk through it a little bit. Ooh, bless you. Wow, that sounded like my wife.
Hey, you know better, nigga, I know you do. You gotta do better, boy, you always do. My skin is dry. Still living. Still living. Financial freedom, my only hope. From living rich and dying broke. Years later, that shit worth $8 million. I can't wait to get this shit to my children. Slater Billy goes again in the dawn. 20 years ago, we drove in these songs, drinking Chris all in. Yeah.
Have you no sense of even deserve?
That's a congressional hearing that they sample in the song.
I never wanted another woman to know something about me that you didn't know. I promise I cried, I couldn't home. Super Bowl goes. My wife in the crib, me and the kids liquid gold. We in a whole different mode. The kid that used to pitch bricks can't be pigeonholed. Y'all be talking crazy under the IG pictures. So when you get the hell, you tell them Blancos and you. I can take no stress, I got a set of twins. Dreadlocks get living a tenement. Dreadlocks get living a tenement. Gangsta don't live in a tenement, yeah. No. Good boy don't live in a tenement, yeah. Even when we win, we gon' lose. We got the same fucking flows. I don't know who is the goal. Mike was losing to Isaiah, but he soon would get his 6 when they birds in my bird with imagination. Assume a virtue if you are back beside the sun, the mama's one. Representing BK to the fullest. Cats are pulling, masters dunking, women be bunking, chicken legs be clucking. Live from that stoppers. Live is one representing BK to the fullest. Bastard dunking with hope, be fighting, chicken head be clucking. Take it from me someday, real low. Take those monies and spread across families. My sister had it, you know, the nephews, cousins, and TT. You'll see, marry his seed, marry my seeds. That's how we keep private money all in the family.
Oh, so you can see a couple of things, and thinking about this as articulation, I think helps you think about sampling a little bit differently. So a couple of things they do to go from the original piece of art, they link up to it and they put it into their own art. The sped up sample, you guys are probably familiar with that. Kanye and I think Ninth Wonder were kind of doing that about the same time. Kanye might have been first. but the sped up sample where they take a slow song and they speed it up. You probably also noticed there were a lot of faster songs that got slowed down a little bit. So just the speed, changing the speed of a piece of music changes the way it can be rapped over and what it means. And I don't know if you're a Jay-Z fan or if you like this album. This is probably my favorite hip-hop album in the last couple of years, if you don't count like Tyler as a hip-hop artist. If you do, then Tyler is right up there. But so anyway, or things like borrowing from another rapper. If you're a hip-hop fan, you know Jay-Z does this all the time. He takes lines from other people, he puts them into his songs. And so immediately in watching this, you can see when the two things are connected. When Nina Simone is taken and changed for Jay-Z's song, you can hear that the articulation, the linking of the two things has changed on the one side, right? It's played faster, it's played slower, so that's changed. Sampling is essentially, the definition of sampling is essentially taking a piece of something and changing it a little bit to fit your purpose. But on the other side, it might be a little bit more difficult to think about. So in the articulation between the Nina Simone song or the Alan Parsons Project song and Jay-Z's album, how do the songs that are sampled from change? Does anybody have any idea?
They're pitched differently.
Okay, yes, so that's the change to the album, that's right. How, as a result of the connection, as a result of the gospel songs being on Jay-Z's album, how does the gospel song change? This is asking you to read my mind. It's not a really good technique for professors, but you never know. Every once in a while somebody does. All right, so I'll just tell you. I really try hard not to ask you to read my mind, but that was a bad move on my part. Okay, so I think there are at least two ways the original song goes through some kind of change. The first one is anybody going to go look up Nina Simone when you get home?
Sure.
If you haven't heard of her, please tell me you're going. You need to know who Nina Simone is. You should be familiar with this music. So I'm guessing if you're into music and you were paying attention to this, you maybe saw an artist that you're like, I don't know if anybody's into gospel here, but there was at least one gospel record that you probably have never heard before that now you're going to go Google. When you listen to it on YouTube, if the artist has their stuff together, they've claimed the rights to that music and they're getting paid whenever you listen. So that's the second thing. Until the Beastie Boys, Paul's Boutique, rappers pretty much just stole whatever they wanted, put it on their album with no copyright payments made. And Paul's Boutique is kind of the breaking point where rappers started having to pay to sample songs. So the second way the one side changes, the original side changes, is they make money. And that's the articulation. So see how thinking about when the two things are put together and how they each change, you think about all these other things. Like how many of you are into hip-hop and when you listen to an album, you're like, oh, I know that beat, or I know where that's from, right? So we all do that if we like hip-hop music. But you think about it on a new level, right? And that's just culture to culture. That's pretty straightforward. Okay, here's another example. The Sugar Hill Gang. I was playing Rapper's Delight when you came into class. Just hold up the number of fingers you think. How many times did the song play before I started talking? Hold up. If you think only once, 1, 2, 2, 3, etc. Okay, most of you are right. Damn it. The whole plan for this point is to get here early enough so that you think it's more than once, but you're right, it was only once. Okay, but I'll explain why that matters in a second. This is how culture and media articulate. And if we want to talk about some kind of directionality, how culture changes to fit media. All right, so Rapper's Delight is originally a 15-minute song. And the reason is that in the 70s, the way hip-hop music started is DJs would play breakbeats. So they would take the best part of a song, they would go back and forth, and that's what they would dance to. And then eventually the DJ might make announcements like, if you've got the white Cadillac DeVille, you're about to get towed. And then they started shouting out their crew, or if somebody important was there, they got on the mic and they'd be like, you know, the Atlanta posse's in the house. I couldn't do that, but you know what I mean. And then they thought, well, if we can talk on the mic over the music, why not say like a song, but rap it? That's how rapping happens. So Rapper's Delight, if you went to a party in the 70s where they looped up the song, which we're going to talk about in a minute, you might dance to it for 10 or 15 minutes. And if there were rappers who were flowing to the beat, the DJ might keep it going as long as there were people who were rapping and sounding good over it. And so they didn't think about how long it was. They just made the song they wanted. There were 3 guys. They had a bunch of verses. At least one of the guys stole his verses from Grandmaster Kaz, who I don't think has ever gotten paid for it. And they got the 15-minute song. Okay, so, and this is the first popular rap song that gets on the radio. So now, what's the one problem with this song getting played on pop radio? It's way too long, right? When you turn on, what's your favorite station in Atlanta? 96 point something, or I don't really pay attention to the numbers. But anyway, any of the popular music stations in Atlanta, they're not playing a 15-minute song. Sort of a side note, black music stations played the 15-minute versions. You guys know you've got one of the best college radio stations in the country here, WRAS, and they would play longer versions in their hip-hop shows. But popular mainstream radio shows, they're not going to play a 15-minute song. So what they did is they narrowed it down to 7 minutes and then 3 minutes and some seconds, less than 4 minutes. All right, now think about articulation again. You've got a song that's 15 minutes. You've got a medium that has some requirements for your song to get on the air. So you go from 15 to 7 to 4, bam. Now, getting on the radio, that articulation changed the song, right? How did radio change? What do you think happened after popular songs? If you did the reading, you know the answer to this probably. What happened when they played Rapper's Delight on mainstream pop stations?
Urban communities done that.
Yeah, that's true. That's a sort of separate thing, but that's very good. That's probably more important.
All different types of communities started.
Yes, so white folks were exposed to hip-hop music, and so that is the media culture society connection. The song gets shortened, which allows it to play on radio, which then makes it popular with people beyond the community that started it. And that's how articulation works. So we go from this 15-minute jam to a tight 4 minutes, and then all of a sudden all the white people are listening to it. Now, let me just say one thing about white people. I'm going to say a lot of things about us, but let me say one right now. As much as you hate white people for whatever you hate them for, they spend a lot of money on hip-hop culture. So I don't know if y'all go to hip-hop shows, and Atlanta's a little bit different. Atlanta still, I think, people of color, Latinas, Latinos, African Americans, go to hip-hop concerts still. But if you go to the big, like, stadium concerts, it's mostly white people. And lots of rappers have commented on this. The most recent one is Rhapsody. She's a female rapper who works with Ninth Wonder. She's probably one of the best rappers right now, period, not woman. Take the woman part off. And she basically says, most of my fan base is white, and I don't hate you, but I wish my own folks would be more of my fan base. So that's one thing I want to mention. So, you know, and as somebody growing up listening to hip-hop culture in a fairly small town, I DJ'd at a roller rink, and I brought hip-hop to the roller rink, and it went from like 200 people on Saturday night to like 800 people and 20 security guards and metal detectors. What's that? No, metal detectors come with a huge crowd at a business run by a white Christian old lady. And so when the skaters changed, and especially, I mean, obviously there's racism there, of course, and I'm not controlling it, I'm just playing the music. But that's a really good observation, and that's a great statement of articulation. So roller skating, I grew up skating to like Atomic Dog and Good Times by Chic, disco stuff and funk stuff, and then hip hop started coming in. When I brought the whole thing, it changed this business and the people who came there, the way they spent money, the way they were policed, and it changed. This was on, it's, a skating rink. It's a huge building on a huge parking lot. It completely changed that block on Friday and Saturday night. And I don't even know all the ways that it changed it, but that is articulation in a nutshell. So thank you. That's brilliant. Thank you for pointing that out. I don't know your name yet, but I'm guessing I'm going to. Okay, so, all right. One more thing about articulation here. Probably a lot of you know that this is sampled from Good Times' Chic, or Chic's Good Times. Good Times. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, so that's the beat. And so that's obviously a culture to a culture articulation. And as I said, initially sampling was they just took the beat and made it their own. But in this case, actually what happened is Chic contacted them and said, hey, we don't like this. And then they got somebody to play, it's called interpolation. They played it very similar, but it was their own rendition of the Good Times beat. So that's how they got around the sampling there. But once Sugar Hill Gang made Good Times that kind of song, then it gets sampled by a bunch of other artists. And if you Google it, there's like 50 songs that sample Good Times Chic, including hip-hop songs, and maybe at the end I'll play some if we have time. There's a song I remember called Bounce, Skate, Roll. It's about roller skating, where they sample Chic's Good Times. Some of you may know Debbie Harry. What's that song called? Crap, sorry. It's been a long week. All right, so anyway, another example of articulation is this really popular disco song gets picked up and sampled for hip-hop songs, and popular music samples it. And so it changes both things. The Good Times folks, Chic, they're making tons of money off the sample, probably more than they made on any record sale. And all these artists have a beat that they can work with. It's immediately identifiable. Anybody who's in hip-hop culture immediately knows Rapper's Delight. Everybody knows Apache, those types of things, and that's how articulation works. All right, one more example. I have no idea what time or day it is. We've got about 30 more minutes left. All right, I always feel like I've got to get what I want to say in because I take your tuition very seriously. And also I love this class and I love y'all. That if I could, my job in Las Vegas is pretty good for a professor. If I could quit that and just do this, I would love it. But I can't afford the $50,000 pay cut. So this is sort of me getting my fix of y'all and this great topic. So sometimes I get a little fired up and I'm just trying to pack as much, I hope, interesting stuff into these lectures as possible. Okay, so anyway, enough editorializing. Here's another example. Graffiti in New York City in the late 70s, early 80s. I know, for a lot of people, it's hard to read the script that graffiti artists use. This is Dondi, and he's one of the most prolific graffiti artists in the 70s and 80s in New York City. And they actually did a book of photography about graffiti. I don't remember the name of it. You can Google it. If you Google Dondi and art book, you'll find it in 2 seconds. And there's a particular picture. I've been meaning to put this into this, but I keep just failing. Where he's in the train yard, so the trains are parked next to each other, and he's standing, he's holding himself up like when you climb up the wall thing on American Ninja Warriors, you know what I'm talking about? So he's standing between the two trains with 1 foot on one train, 1 foot on the other train, and he's spray painting. And he looks cool, and there's part of a piece done, and you see like the sky and the city behind him. I might be making some of that up, but we'll get the picture for next semester. But anyway, they say just from that picture, being in a book that went out beyond graffiti culture, it changed the way people looked at graffiti artists. And as you know from reading the article, once New York City shut down graffiti on the trains, they went into the tunnels for a little bit, and then they quickly went out to buildings, and then eventually now, you know, we've got Basquiat, who started out as a tagger. He was in a crew in New York City, and now he puts stuff in art museums that are worth millions of dollars. So that's one example of the culture society piece. Here's the other example, and this, actually, I forgot. We got another video to watch. Okay, so Style Wars started out trying to be a documentary about hip-hop culture in New York City. Once they finished filming, they realized they didn't have enough to talk about breaking and rapping and everything else, so they just focused on graffiti. And this is the trailer for the movie. If you like hip-hop culture, I strongly encourage you to watch this movie. It's really interesting. But I'm going to play the trailer, and I want you to be listening for the culture society articulations in the trailer.
At the Grand Concourse 149th Street Station in the Bronx, graffiti writers gather at what they call the writer's bench.
They're saying that the kids run the subways, that the system is out of control, that 15 and 16-year-old kids are running the system, and that graffiti is a symbol of that.
Nah, I ain't running the
Hell
system.
yeah.
I'm bombing the system. You're trying to make it look like graffiti writers break windows and everything. It ain't even like that. You know, we doing that, man. Niggas be hard when they come from side. The ones who break the windows.
And it's in the graffiti artist's favor to be as cool, calm, and collected about putting his art on the train as he can. You know, he wants to get in and get out without even being noticed, except for the work that's going to come out to the public, you know, that Monday.
Oh, I've seen comparable graffiti, not necessarily these particular ones.
Okay, I want to pause for a second. Listen really closely. This is the mayor of New York City in this time period. And listen to the way he talks about graffiti artists, and how to punish them. And listen to and watches nonverbals.
Each of these cost us $1 million, in a sense, because others went out and tried to copy. Isn't worth it. Well, it is one of the quality of life offenses, and you can't just take one of those quality of life offenses. It's like three-card Monte and pickpocketing and shoplifting and graffiti defacing.
In three-card Monte and pickpocketing, what happens? Somebody steals something from you, essentially, right? When there's graffiti on a train, what gets stolen from you? Yeah, that's kind of what I thought.
Our public and private walls, they're all in the same area of destroying our lifestyle and making it difficult to enjoy life, and I think has to be responded to. And so I've told you that the response that I think a repeater, three-time repeater should get would be 5 days in jail. Now, obviously, a murderer, if you believe in the death penalty as I do, you want to have the option of executing a murderer. You wouldn't do that to a graffiti writer.
All right, so right now you kind of see inside his head, right? He just said that, but he's not saying what he really thinks, and that shit-eating smile tells it all, right?
The subway system is a very old one, and I've personally explored some tunnels, and I've found rooms where maps that are so old it might have been like the first train line that New York City had. Well, what you want? Just a lot of rock, a lot of steel, the tomb, the dungeon, under the city. A lot of trains, a lot of fun, a lot of wine.
Okay, so a couple of things about that. First of all, the media or the culture society connection is pretty straightforward, right? And if you did the reading, you probably got it a little bit more clearly. Graffiti starts getting put on subway cars in New York City. They start trying to fight it by putting fences up, putting dogs between the fences. There's another clip of the mayor basically saying, build a fence, build a second fence, put dogs between it. And they're like, we're worried the dogs are going to bite somebody outside the fence. And then he's like, put wolves in there. So he literally seriously wanted to build 2 fences around trains and put wolves between the fences to keep graffiti writers from going to the trains. All right, so that's the culture society piece. Culture occurs on the trains. Society tries to combat it, and they go back and forth. They start scraping the windows of the trains. What that does, I don't know. Graffiti artists adjust to that. They start painting the trains with anti-graffiti paint. That doesn't work. It's just a blank canvas for the guys and the women to paint on. And then they get into this pretty serious anti-graffiti campaign that includes putting police officers on trains, putting police officers undercover, and eventually they seriously cut back on the amount of graffiti that's getting on the trains. But in the meantime, there's at least one death. This guy, Michael Stewart, he was tagging inside a car. The police saw him and grabbed him. And we don't know exactly what happened, but between the time they grabbed him in the train and the time they brought him to a mental hospital, which nobody knows why, he died. And the coroner eventually revealed that it was basically blunt force trauma. So we know at least one person died at the hands of society police for painting, not even painting. This guy had a marker. He was just putting his little tag on the wall, and he died. And there's lots of stories about people being harassed and physically assaulted by the police in this anti-graffiti time period. So you can kind of see the culture society linkage. And then the other thing I want to say, because I'm guessing there are some people in here thinking, well, why should they just be able to spray paint on public property? Which is a really good point. So I guess I would say I sort of agree with trying to get the graffiti off the trains. From a white capitalist perspective, it makes sense. So I can see that side of it. But I'm not much of a policing person. I would actually just get rid of the police if I was in charge. So I think having them chasing around kids and beating them up is probably not the way to go. Let's see, there was one more thing I wanted to say. Oh, the last thing I want to say. Does anybody have a guess at who the 2 people were that made this? Men or women? Men. White or other? White. And at the beginning, who does most of the speaking? Of all the graffiti writers in the tunnel, the white kid. I think he's Italian. But anyway, he's at best, he's passing white, right? I don't know how that all works. I don't get too deep into that. But so again, we can never escape this kind of filtering. And we're gonna talk about this more all semester. How things that are going to make it onto mainstream media have to somehow match the perspective of the people who own the media. And in this case, we don't know because we can't see the raw footage, but they must have thought what he was saying was what they wanted to get on film, but you have to wonder why two old white guys put the white kid on explaining graffiti. On the other hand, last thing I want to say about this, and let me preface this by saying it's an observation, not an argument. Hip-hop is African-American culture, no doubt. And we're going to talk about that later in the semester too. But at the beginning of hip-hop culture, when those kids are all in the tunnel waiting for the train, what are their races? There's white kids, there's Latinos and Latinas, there's black kids. If you watch old breakdancing footage, the breakers are not all black. So on the one hand, we can say that it's African-American culture, and I think that's correct. And on the other hand, we can see how white folks always are trying to dig into your art. Yeah, I think it's too late to solve it. And I don't want to solve it because I love it. But I also kind of get that. We're not done, so please... Okay, so... I actually have tons of time, so I can tell you this now. This is just a little thing about me. It drives me crazy when y'all start packing up before we're done. And not because of anything about me, but once you start doing it, it triggers more people to do it. And did you notice the increase in volume? And then people who are still trying to pay attention are trying to listen over you getting your coat on and putting your crap in your bag. So please, I promise, I'm watching the time. I will make sure we're leaving right on time. I want to make use of all the time we've got. And I would really, it's not like I've ID'd anybody who was packing up and you're in trouble. And I'm generally pretty laid back, I think. I hope you're going to see that I'm not much for rules, or I'm pretty flexible. But that's the one thing. It just seems a little bit disrespectful, and it also disrupts what we're doing. So please don't do that. Okay, so thank you. All right, so I want to back up for just 2 seconds. Then I want to talk about a couple of things about the class going forward, what the extra credit is for Tuesday, and then we'll wrap it up before 12:15, I promise. Okay, so the first thing is, if you have 10 minutes later today, like if you don't have a class right after this, just take 10 minutes to sit down and think about this idea of articulation and how, when the two things connect, one or both of them change. So graffiti totally changed when society started trying to stop it on the trains, right? It ended up going into the tunnels and then buildings and then eventually art galleries. There's a lot of public art programs where they provide people with places to paint graffiti, where it's on public property but the owners are allowing it. So graffiti writing and artistry has completely changed. People are still tagging and putting up pieces, but now, like in Atlanta, I used to ride the MARTA everywhere, and when you go east-west, east of the north-south line, both sides you're going to see sections where there's tons of graffiti. People are still doing it, but it's completely changed the culture. And all of these examples, I think, are pretty straightforward. How sampling changes both things. How when society starts paying attention to culture, how it changes. When a piece of culture gets on mainstream media, the changes that happen. And my intention is to really focus on this. I've always taught this lecture at the beginning of this class, but I think I kind of get away from the idea a little bit, but I really want to stay with that. So this idea of articulation is going to be really important. Okay, a couple more things going forward. I don't need to know that you're here, except for one really good reason. GSU might want to know, and I'll give you a couple of examples. One example is if you're missing for a week. They're going to contact me and your other professors and say, have you seen Steve? Have they been in class? And I want to be able to answer that. That's kind of important. That's pretty rare, but still. And then number two, there's an early notification system that some of you may know. I don't know if you do. I'll tell you. GSU is #1 in the country for innovation of undergraduate education. So figuring out how to get students graduated on time, figuring out if you're struggling, how to catch those people and help them succeed. And the early notification is an important part of that. So in a couple of weeks, I'm going to get an email saying, is there anybody that's struggling? And one of the things they ask is, how many days have they missed class? I want to be able to answer that question. And also, this is not one that you will appreciate, but I'll just be honest with you. When you have federal student loans, how the loan works when you leave a class or get an F or withdraw depends on your attendance date. So I just need to know. So all of that is to say, over the weekend, I used to use this app called Acadly, and I think I'm going to stick with it. Some people have told me about Archive. Have any of you used Archive? Okay, 1, 2 people. I think I'm going to stick with Acadly because I know how it works. Over the weekend, I'm going to send you out instructions for getting connected on Acadly. It's not to do anything other than have information in case I need it for somebody else. I'm not going to sit down and be like, oh, Jim didn't show up again today. I don't have time for that. So here's the really basic way that it works. If you have a cell phone you can bring to class, when you get into the class, I start attendance, and then it geolocates you in the room. It doesn't care if you log in your dorm. It only counts the people in the room. So if you have a smartphone, you can come, have your phone ready, log into Acadly. At the beginning of class, we'll just take 3 minutes to get it started. It connects all of you. If you don't have a smartphone, which I know some of you are like, who doesn't have a smartphone? But people don't have smartphones, which we're going to learn later in the semester. What you can do are one of 2 things. If you have a computer or a computing device you can connect to the internet on, you can indicate you're here. It's not attending, but it's present. It's a weird thing. And then you'll just have to come down. I'll have my phone open, and as you shout your name at me, I'll be adding you as here. So for the few people who can't bring their phones, that's how you're going to indicate attendance. And obviously you can opt out of all of this if you want to, but I don't know. That's fine. I mean, there's no downside to you doing it. And the upside, even though it's a small percentage of a chance, is kind of important. Okay, so we'll start doing that on Tuesday. Worst case scenario, I'll have a class list. If you forget your phone or you break it or whatever, you can come down, check the box, and I don't care other than just having the records. That's number 1. Number 2, I wanted to show you the extra credit. If any of you have ever been to another college, you may notice iCollege is horrible. And where I teach in Las Vegas, they use something called Canvas, which is incredible. Probably a lot of you use that in high school, right? Okay, so here is the extra credit assignment for Tuesday. There's an NPR story. It's about 8 minutes long about Latina murals in LA. And what I would like you to do, and so when you click the link, to listen to it, you have to click the play button that's kind of at the top of the page. Actually, we have time to show you. So to listen to it, you click here, 626. And if you want the transcript, which would probably really help to listen and take notes, you just click on the transcript button there. There's the transcript button. Anybody who cares, are you with me on how to listen to it and how to get the transcript? We're not done yet? All right, so what I would like you to do, just like we looked at graffiti in New York City, this story looks at murals in LA. And so what I want you to do as you're listening to this is write about each of these bullets. So I'll just give you one really simple example. Media. Is there media discussed in the story? And if you think about it, murals are on a wall. They don't travel. So they're probably not a mass medium. So the media piece is probably not the biggest piece of the story. Ideally, when you answer this first bullet, that's what you'll recognize about the story. That would be incredible. We're maybe a little early for most of you to get that, so it's fine if you don't. But in this example, the media piece isn't the most important piece. But what I want you to do, so what it might be smart to do is take the PowerPoint or your notes, have the definitions of media, culture, society, and articulation, and then listen to this, and then make notes when you hear media. And what you can even do, listen, here's the system if you really want to make it simple. Get 3 different colored highlighters. Whenever you think they're talking about media, highlight it one color. You know, just click pause, highlight that section. If they're talking about culture, use the second color, society, third color, and then finally, and if you want, you can turn in the transcript with your notes or marks or annotations on it, indicating these things. And then finally, where do you see articulations? So where do culture and society basically connect, and how does one thing change the other? That's going to be due on Tuesday. We have 10 minutes. See, I got this. I'm a pro at this. I've been teaching this longer than y'all have been alive, most of you, so. Okay, is there anything else? Let me think for a second. You go ahead and pack up now, but don't leave. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, yeah, I do have a couple more things since we have time. That's why I said don't leave yet. Yeah, it's always, for now, it's going to be in class. I've never done this before, so we're going to kind of, y'all be patient with me and I'll be flexible with what you give me. If you didn't do the extra credit for today, the first one, you can do it and bring it next time to get the points. But yeah, for now, you're always going to bring it into class and turn it in. One thing you might want to keep in mind, I'm going to have them, and I don't know how easy or quickly I'm going to be able to give them back to you. So if you handwrite it especially, take a picture of it or make a copy of it so you have it to study from, because there will be questions on the exam from these things. But yeah, you're going to turn it in. And I usually, like in my Monday, Wednesday class, I graded them and I just enter the grade and a quick note or anything that you need to know so you can see feedback on iCollege. Good question, thank you. Okay, a couple of things. One, if you email me, email sharrow1@gsu.edu. It's in the syllabus. If you email me in iCollege, it's a piece of crap, and a lot of time I can't see your message. I can't find it. If you have more than like 2 lines, I can't read the whole thing. So I would prefer you send everything to my GSU email address, which is sherro1@gsu.edu. The second thing, I got a bunch of emails. You can imagine missing the first day of class. I got a bunch of emails. One thing that would really help, the syllabus talks about this, but you may not have remembered, put Scom 2050 in your section number. Because if you ask something specific about you, the first thing I have to figure out is what section are you in, because I teach 2 classes. And there's 120 of you, so it's much easier if you tell me, hey, I'm in 27, or even if you just say the Tuesday, Thursday class, then I know when you ask me something, I can look in your specific iCollege to answer it. Let's see. Okay, I just want to talk for a couple seconds about the exams. I don't remember if I put this in the video. One of the comments from students about the classes, the exam questions were too nitpicky. And so my goal for the exams is to write all of the questions, which sounds like what something professors should do, but it's not what a lot of us do because we don't have time. And I'm going to stop saying that, but just so you know, I have a real job. This is my love. This is like me doing my, like painting, like Terry Crews. But unfortunately, I don't have a ton of time to paint. I think it's still going to be good, though. So the exams, I really want to make them more about using the concepts. Like you can see from today, there's going to be at least one question asking you to identify media, one to identify culture, one to identify society. There might be a couple questions about finding articulations. And so I want the exams to be mostly about what we learn in class, and I'll give you sections of the book that you should study and prepare for the exams, but I'm never going to ask you questions from anything in the chapter anywhere. Also, I don't want to ask you factoid questions unless it's something I think you should really know. So as we go forward, I'm going to be trying to tell you how to prepare for the exams and how to study, because when we get to the first exam, I want to make sure y'all are ready for it. But the number one way you can prepare for the exams, do the extra credit. You get the points and you're more ready for the exams. All right, that's it. So, last thing. I am notorious for that. Some of you will grow to love that, and others of you will be like, oh man. There is an extra credit pre-assessment quiz I will put in iCollege today. Take it ASAP. It's free points. Try to do your best, but they just sent me a list of who did it. Your hero, Tuesday, Thursday, 027. All right. Have a good weekend. I'll see you Tuesday. Thank you for being awesome.